Good morning to our viewers and to our listening audience. We are here, my colleague on the left, the attorney at law, Kiel Tacklalsingh, who has been invited to join us to give us a legal perspective on where we are with respect to our democracy and crime and the utter chaos in our society. We meet this morning and under the umbrella of a country that is under siege. And when we look at, for example, on Newsday, I see my colleague MP for Caroni East, Dr. Richard Sicharan, is calling on Fitzgerald Hines to act now on the worsening crime situation in central Trinidad. And he's saying it has become a dumping ground for bodies. Other sub-headlines, another human arm found in Cunupia Stream. Where are we, ladies and gentlemen? 2 more shot dead in Enterprise. Man gunned down in Digo Martin. Man shot near Port of Spain tire shop. This is Wild West territory we are in. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are here to give you our perspective. As I said, on my left is an attorney at law at Kiel Tacklalsingh, and he will be talking, and we both will be talking about democracy under threat and its implications for crime and other aspects of our society. So, ladies and gentlemen, I now give you our invited guest, attorney at law, Kiel Tacklalsingh.
Well, thank you very much, MP Charles, and I want to again thank the United National Congress for inviting me today and giving me a platform to discuss very important and pertinent issues that is affecting our sovereign democratic state, our republic, and our country, and each and every citizen in this country. I also share your concern about those headlines, and I want to say that a lot of what you are seeing in terms of the criminal activity in our country and the very gruesome crimes that continue to plague our society is as a breakdown of the rule of law in this country. Because when the rule of law is not respected by leaders and respected by those on top, it will not be respected by those below. And these murders are symptomatic of a wider problem in our society. And what I wanted to tell the country and what I wanted to come to tell the country today is that it is my considered view, and as a lawyer I'm very careful with my language, is that we are in the midst of a coup. I say that without apology. We are in the midst of a constitutional coup. You see, because people have the impression that dictators take over a country and commit coups through the use of violence and insurrection. That is no longer the case. Modern dictators and modern dictatorships take over a country by undermining the Constitution, undermining constitutional rights, and undermining independent institutions in this country. And this Nelson affair, which has blown up in society, is essentially is a perfect example of an act of insurrection, constitutional insurrection, that is destroying our rule of law and our constitutional norms and values in this country. You see, and as I said, the diabolical methodology by which this government has gone about to overthrow our democracy is to undermine sacred constitutional institutions, one of which has come to the forefront in this whole Nelson scandal is the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution. And that is what we must be afraid of in this country. Because when a government can belligerently and blatantly attack an independent office like the Director of Public Prosecution's office, we know that we are on our way to serious dictatorship. Another tool of a dictator, and it is a tool of a dictator and the companion of oppression to oppress silence. Let me say that again. Silence is the tool of a dictator and the companion to oppression. And what we have in this country is bellowing silence. Bellowing silence. The Prime Minister is silent. The Cabinet is silent. The judiciary is silent. Civil society is silent. And today, why I am here is because we now have an allegation or a comment, and a very well-supported comment by a major newspapers in this country, that lawyers in this country are silent. And the association, the representative body of lawyers, which is the Law Association of Trinidad and Tobago, is silent today amidst the undermining of our democracy. And that cannot be the case in a country that claims to respect and be a sovereign democratic state. We must do better. The Law Association must do better. Civil society must do better. All of those voices that once criticized acts and things in the past and marched, where are you now? Now is the time you need to come out and say things. You see, I have always believed as an attorney at law that it is a duty of a lawyer, a very sacred duty of a lawyer, to educate the population and to point out acts of oppression and to challenge instances of executive overreach. And in that regard, I want to commend the Criminal Bar Association and its head, Mr. Israel Khan. I want to commend them for speaking out on this issue. While I may have disagreements with him in the past, I want to commend them on this issue. I want to commend the Southern Lawyers Association, right? I think they are now the Law Association of Trinidad and Tobago, right? Because they have come out almost immediately with a statement. I believe the president is Mr. Michael Ruppler. I want to commend him and his executive and that association for doing what is necessary. I also want to commend the lawyers in the United National Congress. I have been observing them, and they are doing a magnificent job in educating the population on these issues. The lawyers, I think Mr. Dinesh Rambali, MP, close friend of mine and colleague, Ms. Jayanti Lakshmi Diyal, who I saw her up to last night explaining on a Zoom program very eloquently what are the serious constitutional ramifications for this country. Mr. Saddam Hussein, I read some releases. Excellent job, excellent articulation of the issues. I saw Mr. Arnold Ram with a few releases and saying things on this issue as well. All led, of course, by the Honorable Senior Counsel, Ms. Kamala Prasad Bisesa on this issue, who gave a riveting speech on Monday. I was enthralled when I heard her really take apart the issues and explain them to the population. And really what they are saying is this, and if I could be so bold as to summarize those very, very complex concepts. The Director of Public Prosecution is an independent constitutional office, and that is for good reason, because the DPP is in charge of criminal prosecutions. It has always been the history of the common law and the archaeology of constitutional law that where you have criminal prosecutions, it should be insulated, independent, and free from bias. And therefore, any intrusion on that office cannot be tolerated. Worse yet, any intrusion on the functions of a Director of Public Prosecution or a prosecutor cannot be tolerated. And where do we go from here? It must be understood by the population that once you accept that the DPP and the DPP alone is in charge of criminal prosecutions, the function of plea bargaining is solely a responsibility of the DPP and no one else. What is plea bargaining in short? When a witness or when a defendant wishes to plead guilty and give evidence. Who does that remind you of? And therefore, any discussion as it pertained, in my respectful view, any discussion whatsoever as it pertained to Mr. Nelson and the bringing of charges against eminent lawyers, Mr. Ram Logan and Ramdeen, could only have been conducted by the Director of Public Prosecution. Whenever Mr. Nelson, I don't know what happened, but whenever Mr. Nelson showed up at Cabildo Chambers, the only advice and the only discussion the then Attorney General should have said was, sir, please go a few doors down to Mr. Roger Gaspard, SC, and have a discussion with him. The only opinion and advice that the Attorney General should have been given is that, sir, you ought not to be engaged in drafting any agreement with Mr. Nelson. I say that with all due respect to any other lawyer who would have given advice. It is extremely important because prosecutions can be used to target political opponents. And on that, I make two further points. There is nothing in law called indemnity discussions or indemnity bargaining. If I am wrong, I want to see somebody tell me that tomorrow. There is nothing in law called indemnity bargaining. So whatever the Attorney General was doing was unlawful and illegal, in my respectful view. Because what that was is that you were trespassing on the functions of the DPP, who by act of parliament has the authority to engage in plea bargaining. So that entire process could not be tolerated, and you have tainted the entire prosecution. Tainted it. Secondly, because, and even more so, that this alleged, or well, not alleged prosecution, but this prosecution, and that's putting it very highly, but that's another issue. This prosecution involved, or these allegations involved, political opponents by ordinary principles of bias and natural justice, because you know natural justice is two things. We often talk about right to be heard, but another famous aspect of natural justice is no man shall be a judge in his own cause, nemo judice in causa sua. And therefore, anyone who would have had some type of bias in bringing or enticing a witness to give prosecution ought to have recused themselves from that process. And we all know the former Attorney General knows the recusal law well, right? I see the opposition points that out to him regularly, but I won't engage in that. The point is, by ordinary principles of bias, the Attorney General ought not to have engaged in that. And that is why I have a serious problem as a lawyer. And that is why I'm angry this morning, because my profession, and while the article, yes, talks about certain lawyers, the ordinary public is going to look at this, and they would be right to say, and the Express is right for pointing it out, that lawyers are silent because the Law Association has said nothing. And I call upon the Law Association, you need to say something, because this is not good for our profession, and this is not good for the rule of law, and this is not good for the citizens who repose trust and confidence in the administration of justice. And if I could be permitted, I want to read what I think is a very salient and powerful paragraph in the editorial. This is what it says. At this time, when the legal profession is beset by issues of governance, ethics, expertise, reputation, use and abuse of public funds and value for money, the leading lights to which the public should be able to depend for guidance are almost nowhere to be heard. The exceptions to date are this newspaper's own Mr. Martin Daly, and I should have also commended Mr. Daly, regular columnist for the Sunday Express, the Criminal Bar Association, and the Southern Assembly of Lawyers. Where, we ask, are the voices of the Law Association, the Law Council, Lawyers for Jesus, Hugh Wooding Law School, and the University of the West Indies, all of whom have often commented in the past on different issues, but today are silent? Well, I want to assure the Express and the population that there are lawyers who are speaking out. I hopefully can be one of them. And of course, and while you may say that yes, this politics, you have to take the politics out of it sometimes, because I know for a fact that Mr. Rambali, Ms. Lakshmi Dayal, Mr. Hussain, Mr. Ram, and Mr. Sobas as well, who was on the Sunday press conference last, they are all speaking out, both in their capacity as lawyers and political persons in this country. Of course, all led under the stewardship and great guidance of the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, Kamala Prasad Bisesa, Senior Counsel. I also want to point out that in terms of our democracy, that this is perhaps the last straw that will break the camel's back. Because we have been, for the past 7 years, under siege. Our democracy has been slipping away slowly. And I started this presentation by reminding you that the tool of dictators and the way dictators, the modern dictator, operates in today's world is not by insurrection and coup and violent storming. What they do is slowly and silently, like a cancer, infiltrate and undermine independent institutions. And you only have to think about recently, the Police Service Commission and that fiasco with Mr. Griffith, where you had a politician going into the office of the president to cause the withdrawal of a merit list that ought to have been debated in Parliament. You have a constitution that sets out a process for the appointment of a very independent and important institution, and that of the Commissioner of Police. And that was undermined. You had recently judges of the High Court complaining that their independence is being undermined. What has happened to that? I don't think even the Law Association has said anything about that. You have other institutions that are being undermined. The Board of Inland Revenue is one of them. We recently saw in Parliament the passage of the Revenue Authority, whereby the Minister of Finance, because of the provisions in the Act, and the government are trying to give themselves control and power over Revenue Authority. And the Revenue Authority in itself is a prosecutorial agency because they can investigate you. They can get private and confidential information, and they can institute prosecutions against citizens in this country. And if the Nelson Gate affair is anything by which we can judge the standards which this government will apply to prosecutions, then we have serious concerns with the Revenue Authority. Surveillance laws. Just today, I believe, you had the former Commissioner of Police, or yesterday, I believe it was, the former Commissioner of Police complaining and potentially bringing a lawsuit because he says that he thinks he's being tapped. For what cause? And why? Who authorized that? And that is because the surveillance laws in this country are extremely oppressive. And we know this government has a history of unlawful wiretap. We know that. That's a fact. And so many other pieces of legislation. And that is why I am proud today, and I am happy that I was invited by this party in United National Congress to give my views as a private attorney, because I have always felt that the rule of law party in this country is the UNC. The rule of law party in this country is the United National Congress, and I don't say that lightly. It is the United National Congress that gave us the Freedom of Information Act. It is the United National Congress that gave us the Judicial Review Act. It is the United National Congress that gave us the Equal Opportunities Act and Tribunal. It has always been the United National Congress, in my view, that has respected constitutional rights, and that is why I accepted this invitation. I will always accept this invitation, as long as the issue is one of defending our democracy and the rule of law. And I want to thank you again, and I really hope, it is my wish that citizens in this country, civil society, those of you who, for some reason, you may have been intimidated or afraid in the past to say something, or you didn't want to get into what we say is the janjat. Well, I want to tell you, you need to speak out, and the time is now. Because I could be sitting here next year, and we could be living fully under dictatorship. Freedom of speech is important. A culture of freedom of speech is what fosters and nurtures a democracy. And please exercise it. Come out and say and speak against this. And I call upon my brothers and sisters in the Law Association to also say something. So with those words, I thank you. Unless the question, I know MP Charles has a lot of good contributions to make. And as I started, I said, MP Charles, that one of the things you are seeing, and as a symptom of the breakdown of the rule, as a symptom is the breakdown of the rule of law. All of this crime that is now besieging our country.
We agreed. Good morning. We have heard about the ongoing nightmare, an unprecedented disaster that have befallen our sacred democracy. From Attorney at Law, Kiel Tacklalsingh. Thank you very much for being brave and being articulate in giving information on the problems we face. It is clear that our country has now sunk into a banana republic abyss. Many ordinary folks tell me that it is clear that our legal luminaries, and I think my friend spoke about that earlier, our validating elites, our societal exemplars, our independent voices of moral conscience, our non-partisan watchdogs have all been compromised, or have sold their souls for a mess of pottage, or have been brutally coerced into silence by this evil, vindictive, and spiteful PNM regime. Let's be clear, They're evil, vindictive, and spiteful. You know what is my greatest fear? My greatest fear is that when in the fullness of time, the UNC returns to government, we will inherit a complete and utter wasteland, a farce of a democratic state machinery made into a mockery of itself by Keith Christopher Rowley, Stuart Young, Faris Alwari, Fitzgerald Hine, Camille Robinson Regis, and the whole evil scheming bunch who have no respect for law and order, right and wrong, or any public decency whatsoever. What they say, plain talk, bad manners, the time has come for plain talk. The UNC, when we come into office in the fullness of time, will meet an economy put in shambles with a depleted Heritage and Stabilization Fund and foreign exchange to cover less than 4 weeks of imports if we follow the trajectory on which we are headed. Our small business sector will be in ICU. Our unemployment levels will be astronomical. Mrs. Kamla Prasad-Bissessa will meet an underperforming education system that will function only with the protection of armed police officers. The health sector will have effectively collapsed with our best nurses, our best and brightest nurses working in the United Kingdom and elsewhere. Agriculture will have been destroyed to make way for housing developments. So inept this P&M administration. Many will have migrated. Our once esteemed legal profession, sir, our once esteemed legal profession will be scorned, having under this version of the P&M been regulated to be an eater food, hustlers and gostlers at the financial trough. And I join it, Attorney at Law, Tacklalsingh, in saying, where are the lawyers? They're silent in this time. Murder, mayhem, banditry will be the order of the day. It will be each for himself and devil take the hindmost. It will take all the intellect, passion, vision, insight, professionalism, stoicism, kindness, humanity, creativity, and belief in God to rescue Trinidad and Tobago from the many sins which Dr. Rowley's version of the P&M is now bequeathing to our once lovely Trinidad and Tobago. Plain and simple, this government cannot be trusted to deal with our crisis. They lied to us. As we can all see now, they were committing crimes. In the meantime, they were distracting us, telling the country they were passing a suite, a word they like to use, a suite of legislation to reduce crime. Instead of the suite of legislation, that suite was designed only to enrich themselves, reward friends, family, and financiers, and principally to lock up opponents. Nobody convicted under the anti-gang legislation, no pepper spray, no bail amendment act had no deterrent effect on crime whatsoever. No procurement legislation to go after white-collar crime. No commissioner of police because Rowley bullied the president and the Police Service Commission to withdraw the order of merit list. This was never meant to work. That was not where their priorities lay, not all that legislation. Their preeminent objective was locking up, persecuting political opponents, and in the process, destroying our democracy. That is their trademark policy. They lay charges against you, our opponents. They destroy your reputation, hoping that the 10 years or so it takes to prove your innocence will not matter, since effectively you will have already been sidelined and silenced. That is why they want to charge us. Instead of improving our education system, instead of providing well-paid jobs, instead of bolstering and strengthening our energy sector, instead of reducing crime and making us all safe, They have spent the last 7 years embarking on political witch hunts at the taxpayers' expense. Whether it be presenting fabricated emails as truth, something Dr. Rowley has not apologized yet to the nation, or disregarding the separation of powers, or making non-disclosure agreements to hide their misdeeds, or indemnity agreements in which they had no business. This government lied to us when they said their legislative agenda was to reduce crime. They lied. It was to advance their devious agenda. Act number 12 of 2017, the Criminal Procedure, Plea Discussion and Plea Agreement legislation, was a way to enter into an agreement with Nelson. Pure and simple. They knew full well what they were cooking up with that scamp when they brought the legislation to Parliament. Any reasonable person would be forgiven for concluding that we have since 2017 remained on an EU blacklist because of actions like these. Since the EU, they know more than us about what is happening here. They got to the procurement legislation by removing the oversight for legal services and any other services the minister may determine by order. Now, we have to ask, was this done to ensure that they had a free rein to enter into improper, costly legal arrangements with Nelson? Or was it merely to buy the loyalty of a grap of Port of Spain senior counsels? Just asking for a friend. When I raised the question in Parliament as to why legal services were excluded in procurement legislation, the Prime Minister arrogantly replied, quote, "The government has to have the flexibility to not be mandated to hire the cheapest lawyer or consultant." As if that is what he really meant. Lies and distractions again. So Rowley always wanted the ability to go for the most expensive attorneys to legally polish his dirty tricks. They attempted to interfere in the selection process of the Commissioner of Police, but were immediately shut down by the courts because it was, quote, unjustifiable and unlawful fetter and interference with the independence, jurisdiction, and functions of the Police Service Commission, end of quote. Was this to create an avenue for them to wield undue influence over a Commissioner of Police? Thankfully, we were saved by the courts, legally by the courts. But he went and interfered anyway. So now we have no Commissioner of Police, a disastrous walking waste of time as Minister of National Security, and the highest murder rate we have ever faced in our country's history. While they have explored all avenues and amended the laws conveniently to further their political interests, their Minister of Finance failed to comply with the HSF law concerning timely deposits to the fund. He possibly misbehaved in public by so doing, and there seems to be a conspiracy of silence from our most learned and eloquent financial economists. The double standard is glaring. It brings to light the obvious way in which all of our seemingly independent institutions have been compromised, bought out, bullied, and beaten into silence by this wicked P&M administration. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The only two institutions standing between dictatorship and democracy in Trinidad and Tobago are the UNC, led by Kamla Persad-Bissessar, and the Privy Council. I join with the previous speaker in asking, where is LAT, the Law Association of Trinidad and Tobago? Have they become dependent on excessively overpriced legal briefs from the state? I recall the reported pedestrian, near imbecilic defense of the current AG, who was being called to account for what took place in a Miami court. I was very much ashamed of hear the defense of he is a nice boy. He's one of we. That's the kind of defense that, if true, was more suited to a rum shop than a professional oversight body. Shame on the Law Association, Trinidad and Tobago. Could it be that these so-called luminaries were merely singing for their supper? Just asking for a friend. And what about the IRO, Interreligious Organization? Have they too been bought out? I note the millions allocated in the budget to the refurbishment of the Trinity Cathedral and the bishop's residence at Hayes Court. Both iconic buildings worthy of restoration. But I hear about Bishop's Tea Party, reputed to be a P&M backroom powerhouse. So like the little boy from Scotland, I stand in my shoes and I wonder, is it that we have all reached an inflection point where we attempt to gain the whole world and in the process lose our very souls? And what about Transparency International? In the past, they were never silent. Is it that an ambassadorial appointment now means that there are no matters by this Rowley administration deserving of more transparency? And whatever became of the powerful ladies of Trinidad and Tobago? Are their voices now no longer powerful? Even when this sinister plot has been revealed for all to see? Or do they only criticize female leaders? And why is Father Harvey and Merle Hodge and those like Helen Drayton can only speak in glowing terms of this failing administration? And what about our trade unions? I knew Errol MacLeod personally. I knew George Weeks personally. We had long discussions in Dominica when he was on NP's board at a time when we were building gas stations in Dominica. I read about Tubal Uriah, Buzz Butler, Cola Rienzi, and those were. Under these men, no Keith Christopher Rowley could ever get it in his head to shut down Petrotrin. Never. Lately, the trade unions appear to have woken up from their slumber, but they appear to be a shadow of their former selves, silent when they were needed most. And our Calypsonians, who once called themselves, they boasted that they were the voices of the people, but who now vie with each other to be the voices of the P&M. They are now irrelevant, boring, and a complete waste of time, surviving only on state largesse. Nobody goes to the tent. Under this group of deadbeat, eater food Calypsonians, we will never hear classics such as Who Don't Like It, Get the Hell Out of Here by Sparrow. Or Shorties, remember, Money Ain't No Problem. Or Chalkies, Somebody in Whitehall Mad. Or I think it was Luther who said, the country running smooth, the driver cannot drive. The silence of our independence institution is giving this government a free rein to mash up the place and destroy our beautiful country. See it in the flood of murders. A headline, another hand found. We're now finding body parts all over the place. It is now left to the United States and others to talk about the truth of crime in this country. Foreigners telling us. So while Hines and Brown were splitting hairs and crying foul about the U.S. travel advisory, Canada's was even worse. Canada advises its citizens when visiting Trinidad, don't walk alone at night. There's Canada telling its citizens, if possible, avoid travel outside Port of Spain after dark. My country they're talking about. Drive with windows closed and doors locked. Canada telling its citizens when they're visiting Trinidad. Gangs have followed cars leaving Trinidad's Piarco International Airport to rob travelers at their destination. Home invasions are common and may turn violent. Canada saying so. Be aware that police response often takes time. What an indictment. I challenge Rowley, Hines, and Brown to walk alone without security across Queen's Park Savannah after 7 p.m. on any night. Any night. Do it, Rowley, Hines, and Brown. and then run your mouth. And that is if you survive unscathed. Every single minister under this PNM administration has grossly neglected his or her responsibilities and duty to country in favor of executing a PNM agenda of witch hunts, bacchanal, and commerce. We are witnessing record-breaking levels of crime, brutality, and gruesomeness in our once beautiful paradise. Many are calling for the old-time days before the shameless disaster of Keith Christopher Rowley was elected to office. How many more must die? How many more of our children must be victims to criminals simply because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time? On Sunday, a 9-year-old boy innocently watching a football match, shot and killed. The picture of his utterly distraught mother looking to the heavens would move anyone to tears. This is unacceptable. He was not the first innocent child to be killed in the crossfires of criminals. And unless this administration gets off their backsides and acts, he will not be the last. On Monday afternoon, minutes after a police patrol passed, 2 men were shot dead in Enterprise. I read last evening, it was sent to me. Breaking news, a next body bag was just found at Mount Pleasant Road, Cunupia, the very area where others were found on Monday. We need a bushback far away from the presence of this blight PNM administration. Headless corpses are being discovered, simply dumped in bushes. Dismembered bodies are being found left, right, and center, floating in our watercourses. People are being hog-tied and executed. What's really going on? What is really going on? This country seems to be blighted with a PNM curse. Plain talk, bad manners. Never before have we witnessed such frequent, grotesque acts of criminality. Everything is falling apart under Rowley. And all we get from them is silence. They are unmuted. Not only the lawyers silence, the PNM is silence. Their supporters and cronies are silent. They are mute. Are they hoping it will go away? Are they trusting us to forget? And is crime no longer a public health emergency? Whatever happened to the committee led by permanent secretaries mandated to come up with recommendations for this public health emergency as Rowley described it months ago? Have they met? Will we ever hear from them? Or is this another 10-point crime plan or some other ruse like the Economic Advisory Board that Rowley dreams up to fool the natives and buy time? But you see, we the citizens are to blame. We have seen manifest evidence of Rowley's incompetence. We are witness to his arrogance. Manning warned us about his wajank, out of control behavior. He, Keith Christopher Rowley, shamefully made Mr. Manning's latter days ones of pure misery and hell. But citizens ignored all the evidence and elected him twice. This shameless man has not created a single diversified sector, but senselessly destroyed thousands of well-paying jobs in our existing sectors. No creation, only destruction. He has left behind a wasteland where criminalities abounds and guns are more readily available than water in many communities. He has trampled on our civil liberties. His ministers boast that we have no right to privacy. And by the way, are my phones, telephone conversations, text messages, and emails being monitored? How many opposition MPs' communications are being monitored? We heard today Gary Griffith, former Commissioner of Police, making. But we asked the question. We cannot trust this government to stand by our fundamental right to privacy. Keith Rowley willy-nilly destroys our entrenched 3/5 majority provisions to further his sinister agenda. He allows his minister free rein to recuse themselves without sanction. Not even a pulling them aside for a mature conversation, while P&M family members benefit from endless government contracts. And he gives over $100 million of our money in a failed bid to lock up and discredit his political opponents, while children cannot get laptops. Sick persons cannot get medication. And he boasts that fuel prices were raised 7 times. Wicked. Locking up political opponents using devious means is trademark banana republic behavior. Rowley, let's face it, is most Putinesque in his utterances and behavior. He's a born dictator. We citizens must wake up. We are also hearing rumors that the Minister of National Security may be out of the country, probably to join Acting Commissioner Jacob in England for purposes we can only guess. We are hoping that what we heard is not true. Our Minister of National Security are absent, while per capita, Trinidad and Tobago has the 6th highest crime rate according to the World Population Review, higher than Jamaica, Mexico, Puerto Rico, Syria, Colombia. We are fast on track, heading towards the highest murder rate in our history, over 550 murders. The British, US, Canadian governments know that Trinidad and Tobago, with Hines as Minister of National Security, is a place to avoid. He has shown throughout his time as minister that he's clueless, hapless, and hopeless. He pretends to be some Bajan, but no one is afraid of him. In broad daylight, his constituents kick nasty water on him, forcing him to run. The criminals are happy that he is there, because once he is there, then they run things in Trinidad and Tobago. We ask the question, is Hines' presence as minister merely to keep crime on the front burner so that we cannot focus on the P&M's rape of the treasury and other shenanigans? So Trinidad and Tobago, it's up to you. Wake up, Trinidad and Tobago. Scripture tells us, let those who have eyes see. In Matthew verse 6, we are reminded your eye is the lamp of your body. Scripture also tells us those who have ears, let them hear. We can see the wasteland. We can hear the cries of mothers whose sons are either sent to remand yard or to early graves. We have to vote this bunch of incompetent ministers out of office sooner rather than later. We cannot wait for 2025. So Rowley, you are the worst disaster to befall Trinidad and Tobago. Please, Rowley, take your index pension and go. Please take your jihadi bundle and leave us alone. You have done enough damage to our beloved country. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you. We now have questions.
Mr. Tacklalsingh, today, Senior Counsel Douglas Mendes told the Express that he was, quote, I am sorry, but ethics of the profession do not allow me to discuss the business of my client. Do you think that's sufficient?
The ethics of the profession speaks to confidentiality between a lawyer and a client, and he certainly can't disclose the content of the advice, but I think that he could impress upon his client that in the public interest, whatever advice was rendered should be made public. I believe that call was made by the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, that the advice be rendered public, and that a proper explanation as to how that indemnity agreement came about should be released by the government.
Okay. Anthony Charles, today, former Police Commissioner Gary Griffiths, as you have mentioned, is alleging that his phone was tapped by Commissioner Jacobs. How does the opposition respond to that?
Our response to that has been what it was when legislation to create the SSA in Parliament. Our concern was that the SSA, the director, is on contract, and he's selected by and reports to the Minister of National Security, which gives an opening for a minister to give an instruction, a directive, to a director to tap phones. And my friend could speak more to the law But really, we are concerned. Because sometimes we go into Parliament, I could tell you, and you have a speech prepared, and you get a sense that they're smiling, that they have a copy in front. Now, I could be wrong, but my instinct and my sense of survival tells me that if I have critical things to say in Trinidad and Tobago, I do not say it on the phone. I do not send sensitive information to my political leader, Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bisesa, because I am concerned that it could be intercepted and used for the benefit, the political benefit of the PNM. We have seen their instinct towards dictatorship and dictatorial powers and overreach. And my instinct tells me that this is no exception.
I just wanted to add, and I think you're right, there is a palpable sense of censorship and surveillance, or censorship and a surveillance state that is creeping very slowly, and I think is very, very intrusive. And an issue that was raised, and I believe it was raised by MP Munilal previously, where you had some private agreement being entered into between the SSA and mobile providers and other institutions for the voluntary disclosure of information. I remember reading that. I don't have all the details. But if in fact the SSA is entering into private agreements with bodies to get information, that has to be unlawful, especially where the law and the common law and the statute provides for a process by which the only way you could obtain private and sensitive data of individuals is by a warrant of a judge or through judicial process. And that has always been the position of the law, to interpose that protection of citizens and their private information, that if a police officer or any prosecutorial arm or any investigatory arm of the state wants to get your private information, they must go and satisfy a judge or a judicial officer or a magistrate that they have sufficient evidence to mount reasonable suspicion to intrude. Here you have, from my understanding of the MP's discourse, was that you had a SSA entering into private agreements in order to get information on a voluntary basis, and that has to be completely unlawful and crazy. If that is the case, I have not heard what is the result of that, and perhaps that is something the opposition needs to pursue.
And also, we have not heard, we have not been given a clear answer in terms of what an Israeli spy company.
Yeah.
What would 21, I can't recall the number of hand, what were they doing in Trinidad? When you ask a question in Parliament, you are told that it is a sensitive issue. But I know when I was at the UN, the Israeli ambassador and I were close friends, and he told me that they have the best military-grade spying technology in the world. In the absence of a clear answer of what they are doing in Trinidad, I assume that the government has access to the best military-grade spying equipment in the world. It is for them to deny it and come clean with the population, but they never do.
Mr. Tacklalsingh, as you mentioned, Mr. Scotland, Mr. Peterson, Mr. Mendes, and so on, silent on this issue. Isn't it reasonable to say that maybe some judice is what is preventing them from being able to speak clearly?
The sub judice rule is usually a rule that is used in criminal proceedings where public commentary can affect a jury and influence a jury, and that is the heart of the sub judice rule. I don't think it applies with the same force in civil proceedings, and I don't think the sub judice rule is really something that they could rely on to shield comments. I do accept that as a lawyer they have ethical obligations. Now the client can free them of those obligations. If the client gives you consent to speak about their matter, then that should guide their hand, and they should probably make that request, because these are actions done by the state and the Attorney General. This isn't a private client. When your client is the state should always be transparent in all of its dealings, so that the state should easily waive any issue of confidentiality and allow the lawyers to speak and explain themselves, because it's also unfair to them. It is the Attorney General who has basically put the responsibility. I don't want to use the phrase throw them under the bus, but it is the Attorney General who essentially said that he acted on advice. So free them from that obligation of confidentiality and let them speak.
massively law association silence. Last week, Ms. Chu, who's the president of the association, said that she could only speak on this matter with the input and agreement of the council. I think that's a reasonable excuse.
Well, I mean, that's like saying, in order to live, you need to breathe, or when you're thirsty, drink water. The president is the head of the council, and therefore the president could summon a meeting and have a council meeting and come to a position and issue a statement. It isn't like a bill passing through the House where you have to go through the House and then the Senate and then get assent. It's a single process. You have Zoom. You could call a Zoom meeting and have a statement issued tomorrow if you wanted. So I don't think that that's a reasonable excuse. If in fact she said that, I don't know what she said. But if in fact that's the case, I don't think that's a reasonable excuse. I think the Law Association has moved post haste on many occasions to issue statements in the past. And I don't see why that ought not to have been done by now. The population is looking on, civil society is looking on, the press is looking on, the lawyers in the country are looking on, and we really need something to come from them. And it's telling that the other associations, which, and I don't mean the word inferior in any pejorative manner, but associations which aren't created by Act of Parliament. You have the Criminal Bar Association, and you also have the Southern Lawyers Association. They aren't created by Act of Parliament, but they are associations which have come out and said something. The Law Association in their statute actually talks about upholding the rule of law and promoting the rule of law, and therefore I can't see what could be a better dispensation of your statutory power and responsibility but to come forward and issue a statement on this issue and condemn these actions which are taking place, or offer solutions as to what should take place. I mean, one of the things I have said, and I've said it publicly, is that we now need to consider whether our country needs a malicious prosecution act, so that a judge sitting in the High Court, whenever you bring a malicious prosecution, because some prosecution was instituted maliciously, I think a judge of the High Court should be given the discretion to award damages not only against the state, where taxpayers have to pay for foolishness, but I think a judge in the High Court should be given the discretion to make police officers or persons who are responsible for the institution of malicious prosecution pay from their own pockets the damages when persons turn around and sue the state or sue the police or the Attorney General because of a malicious prosecution.
I think also we have to review how briefs are given to lawyers in Trinidad and Tobago. It seems as if the granting of briefs, that process is weaponized. So to create outputs that were unintended. I think we have reached a stage now where there must be an independent, arm's-length, autonomous body who will look at the government requirements for legal advice and grant those briefs on the basis of transparent principles of which we are all aware and of which we all are agreed to.
And Charles, you mentioned the death of the boy in Chibwana, as well as the discovery of murdered victims and dismembered body parts in Trinidad. There's a prevailing sense in Trinidad amongst the public that the victims of these heinous crimes usually don't get the justice they deserve, particularly with the 9-year-old boy. What should the government be doing to make a commitment that there will be justice for this young boy?
Well, part of the problem is the fact that the conviction rates are low. You have to catch the persons first. And then when you catch them, the few times you catch them, you have to go through a tediously slothful judicial process that sometimes does not give the victims the sense of justice. We have said, and that goes to our 10-point crime plan, which we could put on Facebook. We need to separate the home affairs from the army, from defense, so that we could have a focused attention on the police service, the prison service, immigration, etc. So that's one. Secondly, we need to set what we call SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, attainable. So we will call in all the senior officers in the police service and say, what do we need to do to increase the crime detection rate from 15%, wherever it is today, to 40% in 3 years. Tell us what equipment, manpower, training, etc. So what we do is tie the police service we provide them with resources tied to deliverables. So we do not just give them vehicles as this government does. We will give you vehicles if you could justify a response time of 5 minutes. Tell me, the head of the South Division, the head of the Tobago Division, head of Northwest, etc. Tell me how many vehicles and manpower you need so that you can have roving cars so you hear of an incident within 10 minutes and there's a police response. So right now what we have is qualitative statements about performance. So we need to deal with this criminal situation. And the other major problem, how can you talk about guns and you take off guns and you destroy so many guns when the commissioner of police, the acting commissioner, told us that the guns are coming through the legal ports? So if you do not have scanners working 24/7, you're pitching top and mud. Guns coming in, you taking off the road. Why is it easy? I am told if I want to get a gun, I could rent if I want. You can rent, hire, purchase. It cannot be in our society, and it tells me that this government is not serious about crime.
If I could just add to that, I was particularly shocked to learn in this entire imbroglio of the amount of fees and money that was paid in terms of the Nelson affair and paid to lawyers representing Nelson. And I don't want to criticize anybody's fees, but I can't help but wonder, insofar as people are feeling the injustice and the failure of the criminal justice system, how much of that money could have gone? And I think I heard Senator Lakshmi Dayal and MP Rambali and the other UNC lawyers make the point, which I wish to associate with. How much more forensic scientists we could have hired for that? Could we have had another forensic science center to process forensic evidence to use in prosecutions?
Correct.
How much more prosecutors? How many more prosecutors could we have hired?
Correct.
How much more police could we have hired?
Correct.
And that is where, when you deprive the criminal justice system of the resources to engage in these type of, this orchestrated maelstrom, when you use resources to pursue political ends and political opponents, and they are not properly diverted into the criminal justice system, then you have that sense of alienation and injustice festering in the population.
And why don't you not tie your scholarship program to your needs for forensic scientists, etc.? Why don't you? So we give scholarships. You study, 1,000 people studying engineering, 100,000 studying law, studying whatever. But we have a shortage of critical talent and skills in the judicial system, in the prosecutorial system, in the police service. It seems as if we are just going in helter-skelter, P&M style, vai.
Mr. Tacklalsingh, I don't want to give credence to social media rumors, but there's a particular rumor circulating in social media that the government may bring the DPP for a tribunal for possible misconduct in this matter. Is that, just for the sake of educating our viewers, is that realistic?
Well, I think that would be an absolutely horrendous and chilling step by the government if they were to take any type of disciplinary action against the DPP for his decision that he has made. And I don't want to get into the decision, but what I can tell you is that the decision to prosecute and the decision to stop a prosecution are very, very hard to impeach in law. And all you have to do is look at the famous public law cases on that. And that it has been held by the courts that in the war room of considerations that a director of public prosecution would consider in either deciding to continue a prosecution or to discontinue a prosecution, he has a breadth of discretion and it is not lightly impeached. So that it would really have to be some serious piece of evidence that the government has to even think about that process. And I'm sure many lawyers and civil society and the Law Association, hopefully, would rally around the Director of Public Prosecution's office if there was any attempt to use some far-fetched disciplinary process to dare impeach the DPP.
Well, thank you very much, the listening public. I think We are the UNC, we invite talent to come and enlighten the population about problems, the causes, and what could be done to solve them. So until we meet again, we meet next time on Sunday at 11:30. We'll see you there. Thank you very much.